Hey guys, welcome back to our Quest AI weekly series where we discuss all projects getting started with AI or expanding current projects. With me, I've got Johan, our chief data scientist, here to answer recent questions. How's it going, Johan?
Hey, Jason, it's going well. I detect a little crinkle in your voice.
Yes, I have a little bit of a cold that I'm getting over, so don't mind my congested sound, but yes,
I'm sorry.
feeling better. Yeah. So
Well,
actually,
then,
I think we're doing things a little differently today, right? So we're going to be focusing on a single topic.
okay. Yeah. And it sounds like just from talking to clients and also talking to our partners, a lot of people are asking, just are we even ready to start with AI projects? Looking at our data. And it's really good to start seeing that where people realize that there's a connection between data and AI or machine learning. So obviously, that's a really good question to address. And it's not a specific client or anybody this week. It is really a very common question that comes up. Are we ready for AI and machine learning based on the data? And I'm going to share a slide that we typically show, when we talk to clients, just to kind of convey that concept and to put it in context, right? So bear with me for a second. And there we go. So a lot of times, people are going to say, we want to do X, but I have to kind of push back and say, hold on, let's first see where you're at right now. And most companies these days, when they have their business running smoothly, they can kind of get away with having descriptive analytics and maybe even diagnostic analytics, where it's reactive, it's looking at hindsight. You're also getting some insights, but they're kind of in this first two, maturity phases. Now, it explains to you when you look at a dashboard, for instance, a Power BI dashboard or Tableau, it shows you what happened, right? You can track and see year over year, month over month sales, things like that. You can also diagnose, maybe you filter, maybe you compare and contrast. So this is where most companies live. And if you've been in business for a while, you have this in place. It's pretty guaranteed that you're going to have this. Now, it could be that it's just spreadsheets. And it's funny, there's a term that I heard a couple of years ago. It's called a spread mart, where you have a bunch of spreadsheets. Instead of having a data mart, you have just spreadsheets connecting to each other. That's not sustainable. It's also not scalable, so it's something that you want to move away from. So where you want to go is, what will happen? That's the predictive analytics aspect. And it gives you the potential to kind of see what your business will look like in 6 months based on things that you're doing today, which is also this prescriptive analytics. What should we do about it? So let's say, for instance, Jace, if we all could go back 2019 and see what will happen in 2020, what would you change? If you had an algorithm that could tell you that expect some kind of downfall, in the economy, maybe supply chain, would you do things differently? So
yes, of course.
absolutely, yeah. So I think that's very drastic. So I'm using not a realistic, or maybe not very realistic use case, but it kind of shows that when we know things are going to happen, we can plan for it. So most companies, if they only know what happened in the past and they can diagnose why it happened, they always kind of stay in this mode. They're not going to grow because the opportunities that come up, they're not going to be able to take advantage of it. So moving a company from this phase into predictive and prescriptive is really where that sweet spot is. If you want to grow, you want to compete, you need to really be in this proactive, more optimized and foresight kind of area. Now, when we start off this, you might say, okay, how do we get started? What's the first thing we have to do? How do I know where I fall in, this phase of maturity? We typically start with a data audit. Data audits don't have to take a long time. You might have heard, from big consulting firms, they will bring in a staff of 12 people, and in the next 6 months, they can analyze all of your data. That is a different purpose, right? All we're trying to establish is to look and see what's the culture of data usage and how how do you actually use the data to make decisions in your business? And that's something that can be done in a relatively short time. And that's going to be the first step. That will inform, are we ready to move on to the next phase? If you're maybe just living in a world of spreadsheets, are we ready to move on to maybe more advanced analytics where it's not just a spreadsheet, but maybe it is a Power BI or Looker or some other tool that will give us the ability to really drill down and diagnose issues? Or are we past that point? Can we move into predictive analytics? And this is really where we start adding machine learning and AI, in these areas. That's why it's a different color there. So this last one, I put it there, self-learning analytics. This is something that I start seeing more often happening now. And this happens when you have the ability to release AI to the wild. No, I'm kidding. This is where you have agents. And this week we had a workshop where we discussed a little bit around agent-based learning. What that means is you have agents that basically scans through your data. It's trying to find specific correlations, patterns, insights that you as a human wouldn't have thought of. That's the beauty of these AI agents. You can give them a task and let them run 24/7 on your data and just come back when they find something. And that is really, I think, over the next few years where we're going to see a lot of advancements. Language models is one step in that direction because it's giving us the ability to reason. And then you have other tools like LangChain and agents and all these things that's basically enabling most organizations to have access to that same capabilities. Whereas before, companies like Walmart, they were doing this. Companies like Netflix, Amazon, but only those big companies were able to really get to the self-learning analytics portion. But the tools are really making it much easier these days to get there. So if you look at this maturity, the first question would be, where do we fall? And then the next question is, what do we do to get to the next stage? Now, it should be visible that you're not going to jump from descriptive analytics all the way to prescriptive or to even self. It's a journey. And that's one of the things that we help the clients with, is to get them start with a data audit, see where you fall, and then let's see how do we move to the next stage. Now, I want to stop there for a second and see. I know you've definitely had some clients over the past few years that's kind of been on those journeys at different stages, right?
Yeah. So actually over the last 4-5-ish years, 2 of our major clients, one focused primarily on a digital transformation. They were in the travel, tourism, hospitality side. And then the other one focused more on data migration, and they were financial services. So, I think it was more, seeing how the data was ready to become valuable to them. And I did see that a lot. So
let's dissect it a little bit. So the 2 clients, one of them, you said they were working on data migration. Do you have a sense, where did they move from? Was it like on-prem to the cloud, or?
Yes, exactly. It was on-prem to cloud. And so, we actually it was quite a few resources that they were needing to staff for that. So we did see that a lot.
What kind of resources would be involved in that?
I would say probably DBAs, data engineers, Power BI, Tableau, stuff like that.
Okay, so was that part of their digital transformation, or was that just a pure data project?
I think it was part of the digital transformation because they were dealing with a lot of data warehousing and stuff like that. Okay. So I would say, more on that side.
So that is, I want to say that's pretty common for companies. Over the past 10 years, I've seen a lot of those kind of migrations. And then tools like Snowflake is obviously one of my favorite tools to kind of facilitate that. But it doesn't have to be. Just moving to the cloud opens up a huge amount of possibilities. First of all, scalability. It's just easier to scale in the cloud than having to go to your data center and spin up new servers and install racks and all those kind of things. So definitely cloud-based data systems have become much more, I want to say, common.
Yes, I'm definitely seeing that too.
Yeah, even industries where you typically didn't see it, like financial industries, they always were concerned about the data privacy and concerns about hacking and all that. My response is always, if you're going to go to the cloud infrastructures are probably the most attacked, infrastructures there is. Because if you're a hacker, the easiest way to access a place is if you can just find one vulnerability that covers a lot. And that is the weakness in the cloud. But the benefit of that is they're being attacked every second. So they're much more robust than a data center in Charlotte, So let me ask you, with these projects, the clients that you typically work with, where would you say, are they like director level? Are they technical? Are they managerial? What does the stakeholders typically look like?
I would say, it was very technical when we dealt with it, more along the lines of like data architects, AWS architects, stuff like that. So we would be dealing with them directly, and they would be more who would be, deciding on those factors.
Okay. So what that tells me is that the companies definitely gave priority to leadership. And I think that's a lot of times something that's also missing with any data project, right? It's not just the data itself, it's what do we actually do with it? You need some kind of leadership. And cloud architects are going to help you with the infrastructure, the scaling. But the data architect is really important as well. And I think that's something sometimes people kind of miss a little bit, because how you structure the data, there's definitely a cost, side of things. The cheapest storage is maybe the best just to move the data. It could be blob storage or, S3 buckets. However, you also have to have somebody that knows how is that data going to be used in the future. And I've been on, in all different roles around those projects. And what I've seen sometimes happen, companies will move the data into the cloud and then start modifying the data. Like, for instance, very smart engineer would go ahead and say, you know what, we're going to move all this data to the cloud. In the process of transforming it, we have all these null values in our SQL database, but we want to store it as flat files. So we'll just take the nulls and remove it and put empty space, That sounds like, okay, makes sense. However, if you start doing analytics, machine learning, a null value, an empty space, a zero, those are three different types of values. And you kind of need a strategy when you move your data even to know that the data transformations, anything that goes on around the data needs to be thought out. It can't just be done because somebody thought it's a good idea. There needs to be some reasoning behind it. And this is why when I consult, I typically will say a data architect is definitely key. The second, I would say most important role would be just a cloud architect. So if you have those two roles covered, great. A third would be, if you really want to move on that maturity scale that I showed earlier, if you want to move up to some of the areas where you do machine learning and AI, you need to include somebody that's going to help you think about how to utilize that. There's platforms like Databricks. You have SageMaker from AWS. You have Azure ML, Google's GCP. There's different frameworks and architectures and services where you can move your data and store it so you can analyze it later, and it makes it much easier upfront if you know how you're going to use it. So even if you're not doing it, if, like you said, it's part of their digital transformation, you want to be able to plan and see, okay, if we just move this to blob storage, it's cheap, but is that good enough? Or is it going to be a huge lift to get it into some kind of data warehouse? Sometimes it makes sense to just move it to some kind of, data warehouse before moving it into some cheap storage area, because the plans that you have for it later is going to require that. So, last question around that is just, when you look at the two, you said there's two companies, right? Would you say both of them were able to execute equally successful, or do you think one was a little better than the other one in execution?
Yeah, actually, I would say there was definitely a contrast in that. One was definitely able to execute that a little better. There wasn't as much turnaround as the other one would say, I would say. Okay. So, yeah.
So when you say turnaround, you're talking about like resources on the project?
Yes, resources and just, I guess, the length of getting the project done itself. So that's interesting. How long, if you remember, I know that's
you work on a lot of projects, but do you have a
Mm-hmm.
sense how long these projects took?
Um, I would say some were maybe 6 months, some were 2 years, so kind
Oh,
of a range for both. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's expected. So I worked on a project with a office supply company a couple of years ago, and we did a migration from IBM systems into Snowflake. And it should have probably taken 6 months, maybe a year, but there were
Mm-hmm.
some challenges. Some of the challenges that we ran into, first of all, was just a lot of the business logic. Once you started getting into the project, you realize that there's no single place to find what the logic was. So there was a big effort to extract all that business logic. It wasn't just about moving the data. I mean, like they call it lift and ship. We couldn't do that because the logic was inherent in the systems, the IBM systems. So there was a big effort extracting the logic and then recreating it in Snowflake. That took time. But the majority of it was the vendors they selected in the beginning were overseas vendors. And they selected them purely based on price. And
Mm-hmm.
it took about a year to figure out that they're not moving as fast as they should. They're not doing, the right things, which means there wasn't good leadership to manage that. And they kind of, brought it not a big, I want to say a big portion of the work they brought back to the States to
And they
execute.
almost have to start from scratch. Yep, we see that too.
You see that
Uh-huh.
happen a lot? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I think, if companies are looking at, are we ready for AI? Are we ready to actually get value from it? There's a couple of checkpoints. One, I would start with leadership. You need somebody that understands the problem, not just moving data, but what is the use of the data? How are we going to track and monitor progress, so we can adjust? Every project is going to have those adjustments you have to do, but you kind of need to know what to look out for. And then also what can we do to pivot and move forward? The second thing is, you said turnaround on these projects. I've seen that happen a lot where you have people that's working on this project and it is not easy work. Data migration, it is very intense work. So turnaround is expected. How do you also look at the people working on the project to ensure that they keep being motivated? And if they decide to leave, do you have that knowledge that they gained throughout the project that you can transfer to somebody quickly? Or is that going to be, a learning curve?
Another training, right. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So those are definitely challenges that we see across the enterprise, different businesses, different sizes. If you had advice, right? If you could go back to those two clients, and this was the beginning of the engagement, is there anything you can think of that you would tell them to do a little differently in just staffing and planning?
I mean, I would say maybe just in the initial screening process, be a little bit more thorough. And then throughout the process, more check-ins, maybe just with their own resources, within the management team, within, both sides, I would say. So,
Okay.
yeah, I guess those.
Yeah. So I would add from my perspective suggestions would be, first of all, identify who's going to be the leaders that owns, even if they're not doing, somebody needs to own the responsibility of answering up for timelines, architecture, direction, strategy, all those things, right? Once that is established, I would go back and, something that you said is the upfront screening. So this is something that, we do. All of the people we put on projects, I screen personally,
Mm-hmm.
but I also bring in other people that's experts in certain areas. And it ensures that, when you have somebody that understands the problem and they also understand the technical skills and capabilities needed, you're going to be able to kind of feed out some of the problems that you have in getting the right team together. If somebody's establishing a team internally, I would make sure that I get the right people in there, not necessarily the ones that's worked with the same technology. A lot of times I would use them as consultants to the people doing the actual work. The reason is that the bad habits that you have maybe on your on-prem implementation, you don't want to carry that through on the cloud implementation. However, you want to carry through the same kind of knowledge, so having them connected to the project is good, but not necessarily executing on the project. So the projects that I've seen work really well is where you do have two teams. One team that owns the on-prem implementation, and they work with the team that's moving it to the cloud implementation. that's typically a good, not always possible. Maybe you have a small team, you can't do that, and it's maybe one or two people. I would still make it very clear that, there's going to be a strategy around the cloud deployment. It's not just lift and ship it. We like to do those things, and it, like going back to Snowflake, it makes it easy to do those things, but is it the right thing to do? Not always. So I think we covered this topic. Is there anything else, just that you've heard, or things that we probably want to discuss around, getting your AI or getting your data ready for AI and machine learning?
I think that's pretty much it on my end. Yeah, I think that's good for me.
All right. Well, thank you, Jace.
Yeah, thanks, Johan. And we'll see you guys next week.